Q, everybody's favourite antagonist turned friend and one of Star Trek's most entertaining guest characters. He would pop up from time to time in various locations just to make havoc, impart wisdom, things like that. And while he was never a particular cemented part of one franchise, he did seem to pop up on pretty much every single one of them. Now, I'm not saying that sounds exactly like me at What Culture, but I'm not saying that. I mean, the guy is basically a god, isn't he? He lives his life fear or retribution or consequence, and he just pops up on every single Star Trek franchise to have varying levels of relationship with all the major characters. Him and Picard were best friends, really, let's admit that now. Him and Janeway were incredibly weird, and Sisko, well, he punched him in the face that time because he's the best captain. And the thing is, despite his relatively few appearances across Star Trek as a whole, he is one of the most impactful, most deep, most thoughtful characters ever written, because while the Q are not humans, they constantly hold up a mirror to humans. We see parts of our worst fears, our worst aspirations, our worst qualities reflected back in them. Make you think. And as a result, it is very hard to argue that any single guest star in Star Trek history was as impactful, was as much fun as Q. So, with that in mind, how about you and me right now, we rank all of those episodes. I've got nothing to do for the next 15 minutes anyway, so my name is Adam Cleary and these are all the Star Trek Q episodes ranked from worst to best. Number 12, Q-less. Okay, so while Ben Sisko was the best captain in Star Trek history, trademark TMRC, do not at me ever, his Q episode was also the worst one. Like, yeah, he did sock him in the jaw and that was brilliant, but that was pretty much the only interesting thing that happened. They did the Q episode far too quickly. DS9 was still trying to find its own identity, find its feet in the Star Trek universe, and they chucked in the next generation's greatest guest star. A bad move. And even then he was chasing Vash, who herself was a guest star from the next generation, so it just kind of felt like this was a next generation storyline continuing into another Star Trek show, and we still didn't even really know what that Star Trek show was supposed to be, so nah, bad. Moving on. Number 11, Encounter at Farpoint. Oh, quite a controversial pick, this one, because Encounter at Farpoint is a bit of a sacred cow in Star Trek. We do look back at those first two series of The Next Generation as a bit of a hit and miss sort of time, but the pilot episode remains very pure and very precious in the hearts of many. You remember it's the Enterprise's maiden voyage, and they go and they meet the Bandai, and there's the thing, the big space thing, and Q puts them on trial for the crimes of humanity. It's not a bad episode, but it's not a good Q episode. That's not the Q we would know and love. I think the reason for that is A, they hadn't quite nailed down what the character of Q was supposed to be yet. He was really sinister and evil in this one, and also this is kind of just two episodes like just mashed bang together like that. There was a good Q storyline in the midst of it all, but the whole stuff with the Bandai was very different. The bottom line here is that Q's entire character was supposed to be having a lot of fun with his mischief on the Enterprise, and this all just seems too serious. Number 10, Hide Q. You see, this should have been the introduction to Q episode, shouldn't it? Because it presents what the continuum is and how it best interacts with humanity. They admire our ability to learn and grow, which they've stopped doing because, well, they've learned everything and grown omnipotent. And the best thing about this was it introduced this range that Q had. Yes, he was this sinister, demonic creature, and yes, his motivations were not to be trusted, but also he's really funny, and him and Picard would do speeches off against each other, and he would just generally rip the piss out of him. This is the character we would come to know and love, and this was kind of the first time we got to meet him. Number 9, the Q and the Grey. Yeah, look, I like this Q episode personally, but watched back in context with all the other ones, it does kind of feel that he'd lost his Q-ness almost. He had malevolented himself out. The thing is, while Q is at his best when he's a bit silly, this episode did get a bit too silly. Like, they wanted to present the continuum to us in the state of a civil war, which felt very serious, but it just was all a bit slapstick. However, I will say that slapstick is worth it for the "I'm not talking about the puppy" line, which is one of my favourite in Voyager history. Number 8, Q2. Now, after being introduced to Q's son in the Q and the Grey, we get an entire episode about Q's son in Q2? Q squared? I can never remember. My favourite bit about this is in trying to cast a son for John Delancey, they just cast Keegan Delancey, who is literally his actual son. So not only is that Q and his son, but it's the actor and his... You don't get that very often. This was, of course, the last appearance of Q so far, in the franchise, as we get to sort of go back to where it all began from, because by introducing his son, we see an imperfect, non-finished version of him who is angry and just not quite the finished product. And the weird thing is, despite being introduced as just childish and sleazy and very unlikable, the episode does actually manage to craft a fairly good character by the end of it, which, to be fair, Keegan plays to perfection. It's not Q's episode, it's Q Jr.'s episode, but it's good nonetheless. Number 7, Cupid. Now, people will tell you that the Next Generation wasn't very humorous. It didn't do humour very well. Well, to them I say, what about this? It's piss funny. Look at it, it's the Next Generation in tights and Worf is not a merry man. It's brilliant. Now again, this one is all about Vash, and it's her last appearance in the Next Generation where she catches Q's eye, and it turns out they run off together to the Gamma Quadrant to do all this stuff, but don't mind any of that. It's Sherwood Forest, and it's the Next Generation in tights, and it's just really funny. However, one slight problem with this, the episode did get a bit of criticism for the way it portrayed its gender roles, like Vash is the damsel who needs rescued, and Troy and Crusher are just in the background the whole time, not really doing anything. And producers of the show, do you know what they said? They were like, well, it's set in the 12th century, so we're just trying to stay true to the gender roles of the 12th century so that it's accurate. And you know what? Alright, I'll hold my hands up here and say, yeah, fair enough. If you're trying to be accurate to 900 years ago, I guess that just is how you would portray women in the episode. But just really quick question while we're here. If you're trying to be accurate to 900 years ago, if that's so important to you, Data and Worf. Number 6, True Q. Do you know what? I think of all the Q episodes, this is the one with the best acting. The whole idea of the continuum, what the Q are and what they stand for and how they interact was probably best developed in Voyager, but in this Next Generation episode, it did lay the groundwork pretty well. Like, think about it from a theosophical, that's a word, point of view. Like, this race of gods, of omnipotent, just divine beings, still have the concept of capital punishment, and us mere mortals, we tiny insects to them, are revulsed. We have superior morality to these creatures. It's quite an interesting proposition, and the episode handled it really well. I'll tell you why this episode is so good, right? Because Q is always on this spectrum somewhere between evil plans, some of the crew are gonna die, and hey everybody, haven't you missed your old buddy, old pal Q? And this episode proves that it's always just somewhere between. There is always elements of both in Q. Because yeah, he's got the comedy, there's a few funny bits in this, but like, he's gonna kill that poor girl. He's really gonna kill her. Like, whatever Q is doing here, you should never ever fully trust his motivations. It's just, I liked it. Number 5, Deja Q. Alright, here it is. For all the episodes that kind of establish this about Q, establish that about Q, this is probably where they finally nailed down exactly what the character was going to be, and the way they did that was by stripping him of all of his powers. And the thing is, he learns a lot in this episode, because by not having those powers, we learn precisely what it is he's lost, and by being forced to be human, we learn precisely what his connection is to this race, to these people, to the crew of this vessel. And of course, the best thing about this episode, when he gets his powers back at the end, that's really funny too. You get Data laughing, you get the mariachi band on the bridge, you get the infamous Picard facepalm meme, all from this episode. What more do you want? Number 4, Death Wish. Yeah, you see, this is what I mean about Voyager being the best episode to flesh out all of the Q stuff, because it took the character and went as far beyond him as it could in terms of the whole continuum. You think about it, it wasn't going to be easy to find a reason to get Q into an episode of Voyager, given how widely criticised his appearance in Deep Space Nine was. They wanted him there, but they needed a valid reason for him to be there. And the way they did it was by turning him into this far deeper, far richer, far better written philosophical character, rather than just, haha, now you're tiny. The idea that both he and the Continuum have these just deep-rooted, millennia-long cultural touchstones, and that one of them could wish to violate these and it would be such a problem for them, is just not something we'd considered during the Next Generation. Do you know what it is? It's a grown-up performance, this, because whenever you're introduced to a character and they're around for years and years and years and years, you want to see growth and you want to see development. Having Q just turn up and be the Q we know and love would have been great, but it wouldn't have been, there's no reason to do that. Doing this episode felt substantial, it felt important, it felt like there was a really good reason to watch to see Q. And also Riker's in this episode, which always melted my mind a bit. Number 3, Q Who. Now, this is by some distance the darkest Q episode, and it's also the introduction of the Borg. Every single time they've come up in Star Trek ever since then, you must never forget it was Q that did this. It was Q. And you know what? It's probably the most fitting because, like, the whole thing about Q is he looks at humanity as a developing race, and he probably weirdly sees himself as some kind of moral, spiritual guide for them, almost as a teacher. And this is the one lesson in which he actually teaches them a lesson. Yeah, you're Starfleet, yeah, you're Captain Picard, yeah, you're boldly going, but you're not ready for what's out here. Like, the whole universe in Star Trek needed something like this, because otherwise they're just going to planets and meeting people and just having nice chats and, good tea every single week. Like, they needed a bit of fear, and it was Q that gave them the fear. And he does that by costing them the lives of 18 crew members. Not just by being a trickster, not by being a prankster, by letting 18 members of that crew die. And you know what? That was the moment you should have clocked that, yeah, Q takes the form of a human, he's got human characteristics, and we can draw all these comparisons between the human race and the continuum, but he was not human. He lacked any shred of humanity because he let those people die just to teach Picard a lesson, just to get Picard to admit he was wrong. Number 2, all good things. Okay, so this episode could easily be number 1 in this or any Star Trek The Next Generation list. In fact, you could even make arguments that it is the number 1 best episode of The Next Generation, but it's not the best Q episode. And the reason for that is while it is still one of the greatest offerings we ever had from this show, it is at its heart a Picard episode. It's designed to close the book of The Next Generation and complete the story of its central character. Yes, Q is there, yes, he's an integral part of this, but it's not about him. And it's genuinely an absolute triumph of writing because it's set in 3 separate time zones and manages to hit all the right story beats, getting this perfect blend of nostalgia from the start of the show, the celebration of where we are now, and also how it's built towards the franchise's future. Like, you could have 100 goes on 100 different shows trying to write something like this, and you would never make it work. All Good Things is an incredible achievement. And the way it works for Q is it brings back Q the judge. We've seen Q the prankster, Q the human, Q the teacher, Q the father, Q everything, but Q the judge was where we first met him, and this brings that story full circle as well. And do you know why this is such a perfect culmination of Q's story? Because he is always so dismissive of their trials, of their tribulations, of the things they've overcome, of their heartache, of their pain, of their humanity, everything, and yet by setting them this challenge and them overcoming it purely by using the lessons they have learned in 7 years of this voyage, he was wrong. He was simultaneously wrong about them in terms of what they were capable of, but right to invest so much of his time and his attention, which is just pure Q. And in terms of a performance, it's just great. Like, he's sinister, he's brooding, he's scary, he's not to be trusted, but he's also really funny in parts of this. It is Q at his most pure, and it's almost the best Q episode, except for number 1, Tapestry. Right, so this is not the best Star Trek The Next Generation episode. It's not even the best episode of Star Trek The Next Generation that Q is in, but it is the best Q episode, because at its heart, the whole point of having Q in these shows was as the perfect foil for Patrick Stewart, for Jean-Luc Picard himself, and that relationship never got better than it did in this episode. Basically, he's dead. He's absolutely dead. Picard, he's been shot in the chest, and of course he's got that fake heart from when he was a bit of a gadabout in his youth, and that's it. He's gonna die on that table. But Q decides he's gonna have a bit of fun with his death instead, and really makes him... well, he makes him appreciate his life, basically. Like, Picard is, resentful of himself because he knows it's that artificial heart that he got in his misspent youth that's gonna do for him today. That's the end of it, because he just couldn't behave when he was younger. So he tells Q if he could go all back and do it again, he would be a far more grown-up, far more mature, far more Jean-Luc Picard than the one he was. So Q goes full It's a Wonderful Life on him and goes, all right, you reckon, do you? Let's see. And it turns out if Picard had lived his entire life being as Picard as he is now, he never would have done anything. Like, he learned lessons from his youth. He needed to be wild and rebellious and take risks. Otherwise, he never would have got noticed. He never would have become captain of the Enterprise. Picard says, do you know what? You're right, that absolutely sucks. I'd rather die right now as the person I was than live another day as the person I think I should have been. And what a concept for an episode that is. And the best bit of all, Q goes, nah, you're alright, I'll let you live for a bit longer. There are still lessons to be learned, my friend, and brings him back to life. It's just, honestly, I think that's one of my favourite, no, can I say it? That's my favourite episode of The Next Generation. It is. So there you have it, those are all the Q episodes. I'm sorry, I'm sitting in the wrong place here. That's better, all the Q episodes of The Next Generation ranked from worst to best. Let us know what you made of them all in the comments below. And of course, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. But in the meantime, my little friends, I have of course been Adam Cleary, probably the closest thing to Q in your lives. And I will see you soon. Goodbye.